Episode 6. Truth or Dare. Supermoon. The moon loomed large in the sky above Martin's farm, a luminescent nightlight cast into Bibi and Tina's room. Head to head, the two girls lay snuggled in their beds. While Tina dreamed restlessly, Bibi stared contemplatively into the moonlight. She couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts traveled through her head. She had celebrated with Tina in the chill corner after their great reconciliation, but she was still at a loss with Chico, this mysterious young Spaniard who was currently helping out at the stables. Supposedly descended from the noble family of De La Mancha. Bibi didn't know why, but sometimes Chico really got on her nerves. He had left his phone under a mountain of cushions. When it rang, she had answered it, and a woman's voice had spoken to her in Spanish. At that moment, Chico had run towards her and angrily ripped it from her hand. "Have you ever heard of privacy?" he had scolded, and left without another word. Bibi's thoughts continuously circled around this incident. Still caught in a dream, Tina shifted uneasily between the sheets and called out loudly in Spanish, "Para siempre," just as she had sung when she'd fallen off her horse and fixed her affections no longer on Alex, but on Chico. Then Tina woke up suddenly. Neither of them could sleep. "Boah, the moon is so bright, isn't it?" Tina noticed, yawning as she looked over the edge of the bed to Bibi, who didn't react at all. "What's wrong?" Tina asked her friend. Bibi replied quietly, "Well, that Chico got on my nerves yesterday, just because I happened to peek on his phone a bit. If that was his girlfriend, then he could have just said so." The special relationship between Bibi and Chico had long caught Tina's attention. "Maybe that was his mother," Tina offered encouragingly. "Or his sister, or a friend and not a girlfriend," she appeased. Bibi shook her head. "Something's not right. I've done some research." Tina's mouth fell open. "You checked to see if Chico has a girlfriend?" "Of course not," Bibi objected and changed to a serious tone. "But the noble De La Mancha family, they only show up once, in a book from the 16th century about Don Quixote de la Mancha." Tina's eyes widened. She had never heard of him before. "The guy who fought the windmills?" Bibi gave her a hint, but Tina shook her head. "Never mind. In any case, Chico isn't a typical noble name now, is it?" "No," Tina had to admit. "This guy is a mystery," sighed Bibi. Tina grinned and tried a new theme as a diversionary tactic. "Hey, we still haven't decided what we're going to do in the supermoon. Maybe some kind of game with the summer camp kids?" New guests had arrived at Martin's farm, the two girls, Ellie and Felina, and little Finn, and they wanted to offer them something special. That gave Bibi an idea. "Yeah, one where I can really grill Chico." Tina grinned. If Bibi set her mind on something, there was no stopping her. Okay for today. The next morning, Alex arrived in the studio early for his internship at Radio Flamingo. Behold the red moon rising from the depths of the sea, and a dream begins to wander. Fantasy begins to flow. Yes, the supermoon is coming, he announced. His boss, Funky Farnsworth, who was preparing the other shows for the day, listened in amazement. What an unusual weather forecast. Freddie, who was tuned in while cleaning his motorcycle, paused for a moment and frowned. What's up with him again? But Alex was in his element and again spoke into the microphone. Tonight, our lunar friend will be unusually close, shining high and unusually bright, robbing us all of sleep. At least we can watch this breathtaking natural phenomenon in mild temperatures, a much-needed break after the blazing sun hammered us throughout the day. Ideal conditions for the game nights with friends, just like I'll do with mine. This time, Freddie grinned approvingly. No games at night without Freddie. He wouldn't miss it for the world. But Alex's musings were far from over. Endless summer, friends, both a curse and a blessing. Funky had finally had enough. She tossed off her headphones, entered the studio, and gave him a sign to stop. Taking the cue, Alex hurriedly blurted out, "This is Radio Flamingo, ad-free, unbiased, and impeccable, and that was the weather." Paul started the music, and Funky rebuked Alex. "You've got a great poetic streak, kid, very nice, but since when are the weather forecasts longer than the news? I figured that after the summer hits had gone so well, we could also be a bit creative with the weather," Alex defended himself. Funky looked at him strictly. "Don't forget, you're still an intern, okay today?" "Okay today?" Alex repeated. "Okay for today," Funky answered threateningly, and left the room. No sooner had she exited when she suddenly returned with a smile plastered across her face. "Oh, Alex, by the way, did you ever ask your father about the interview? No, wouldn't be a bad idea to score some bonus points, would it?" She ran busily back to her desk. Alex looked after her, annoyed. So much for creative freedom. Why did she have to put him under so much pressure? His father didn't like radio at all, even though he had probably heard Alex's announcement during his morning exercises. The whole family. Over at the barn, preparations for the game night were in full swing. Mrs. Martin and the camp children set up a buffet, while Roger arranged a comfortable sitting area. A discarded plush sofa stood at an improvised table, and he built further seating areas out of hay bales. Billy the Kid, Roger's pony, nibbled on a bale corner while Bibi and Tina hung up fairy lights. "What if Chico always chooses Dare?" Tina asked. "Then I'll think of something," replied Bibi confidently. Count Falco entered the barn with an energetic stride, followed by Alex. "Please excuse the delay, Suzanne," he shouted loudly, "but my son and this useless internship with which he squanders so much time—" Mrs. Martin brushed off his excitement and said calmly, 2 minutes late, Falco." 5 minutes early is the Emperor's punctuality," contradicted the Count, for whom every minute of delay meant a personal setback. "Yes, father, and luckily that time is long ago," grumbled Alex. Tina greeted him with a kiss. "Oh, in a good mood, I see," she winked. "Honestly, truth or dare with my father?" Alex answered grumpily. Bibi chimed in. "Well, it wasn't my idea, with your father." She waved a thumb over towards Chico, who had freshened himself before marching into the barn. It was he who had invited Count Falco without consulting anyone else beforehand. "I thought you'd be pleased," Chico said, somewhat defensively to Alex. "In Spain, the whole family always plays together." Alex smiled weakly. "The whole family. You don't always have it easy as an only child, you know." Chico nodded. "Believe me, I know all too well what you mean. But maybe that can still change." Alex looked at him ambivalently, as did Bibi and Tina. To everyone's astonishment, Freddie suddenly appeared in the barn. "Hey, I heard on the radio you're having a games night. Of course I'm in." Without any further greetings, he gripped a piece of cake from the buffet and bit in with relish. "No party without Freddie." Truth or dare? Everyone took their seats, full of anticipation. The summer camp kids sat on the old sofa and looked eagerly at Freddie, who let out a howl and then growled in a creepy undertone. "Have you heard? There are wolves in the area." A warning that generated immediate respect. Tina sighed. "Oh, Freddie. Why did he always have to annoy others?" "It's only a young wolf traveling through who was abandoned by his pack," Mrs. Martin quickly clarified, hoping to ease the kids' panic and lay the matter to rest. But Count Falco couldn't resist his own interjection. "Homo homini lupus est. Not the animal, but man is a wolf to man." Alex rolled his eyes. Freddie just shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know French," he stated, oblivious to Count Falco's Latin proverb. "Wolves are not interested in people," Mrs. Martin reassured the children. "And not for little stinkers like you, anyway," Roger added, sitting next to them with Billy the Kid. Bibi looked suspiciously at Chico, who had taken a seat next to Count Falco, and asked Tina quietly, what did Chico mean by that? Only child, as if. And then perhaps this can still change? Tina just shrugged. She had no idea what Chico was alluding to, but really wanted to get the games going. Fortunately, Mrs. Martin put an end to all the banter. So, then may the... She looked around. Count Falco rose expectantly. The smallest may begin, Suzanne Martin finished her sentence. A touch disappointed, the Count again sat down while Finn rushed over to the table. He quickly spun the bottle, which, as its momentum slowed and finally came to a stop, pointed directly at Chico. Bibi looked at Tina excitedly. Off to a good start. Finn asked, Truth or dare? Chico hesitated briefly and then answered, I'll take dare. Surprise, surprise, muttered Bibi under her breath. Finn's task for Chico was to eat a lemon. All right, if that's what you want. Chico bit into it courageously and grimaced. So sour. Everyone laughed, but a dare was a dare. And so it went on happily. Freddie had loads of fun accepting the longest burp challenge. Mrs. Martin had to stick her finger into Count Falco's ear. Felina had to stay serious while everyone tried to make her laugh. And because she actually managed to keep a straight face, she was allowed to spin the bottle. Count Falco was becoming more and more impatient. He couldn't wait until it was his turn. No way! The bottle stopped and pointed to Roger. Truth or dare? Asked Felina. Truth. Roger chose with a casual gesture. Apparently he had nothing to hide. Felina asked, Where would you like to be right now? Count Falco rolled his eyes. Ugh, nobody really cares. In Norway, Roger replied coolly, ignoring the Count. Why Norway? Tina remarked. She didn't know that Roger was thinking of Kim Win-Win, the enterprising young woman who had caused him so much longing. She wanted to buy a certain horse pasture from Martin's farm to mine valuable gravel, and had told Roger at a meeting by the ice cream parlor that her business would soon take her to Norway. Tina's brother didn't see why he should tell Tina any of this and pointed out the rules of the game. Just one question, Tina. But Freddie seemed to suspect something and asked with a cheeky grin. Because of a love affair or something? Even Roger couldn't resist revealing a mysterious smile. Do you know an Elena? The bottle spun around and around until it was finally Count Falco's turn. When Ellis asked about truth or dare, he stood up and cleared his throat. Of course, I take the truth. After all, nobility stands for sincerity, straightforwardness, and backbone. He hadn't expected Ellis's question, however, as she shouted across the group, Have you ever farted? But the Count didn't let on and nodded seriously. Of course I have farted before. Here I am with Luther. I am of a different mind 10 times in the course of a day, but I resist the devil, and often it is with a fart that I chase him away. He nodded smugly to the children, who didn't understand his old quote at all. You can ponder that one. Full of verve, the Count spun the bottle. Bibi whispered to Tina, Can Chico finally get his turn again? But the bottle continued to spin until, once again, it pointed in Roger's direction. This is for Billy, Roger pointed to his pony. That's definitely Billy. Everyone laughed. Count Falco clapped his hands enthusiastically. Yes, but because you both have roughly the same hairstyle, you get to answer, Roger. Truth or dare? He challenged Roger, who had chosen dare this time, to eat the oat trough empty like a horse. Falco, Mrs. Martin admonished him, then looked apologetically at her son, who replied in a good-natured way. No problem. I'll do it. Everyone, except Count Falco, felt for Roger, who now bent his head over a bowl of oats and began to chew. Count Falco grinned. Well, empty already? Roger took another bite and chewed laboriously, but he simply couldn't finish the oats. Sorry, I really tried, he muffled through a last mouthful. Count Falco triumphed. He didn't make it! Then I may go again. He spun the bottle, and this time it stopped right in front of his son. Dare, cried Alex with a fighting glow in his eyes. Count Falco grinned with mischievous joy. Then do more push-ups than Tina, he demanded. Tina looked at him incredulously. But hey, she was strong, and a few push-ups were certainly no problem for her. You can do it, Bibi thought. You'll never make it, Freddie objected. Come on, Alex, vamos, Chico fired. Alex and Tina got themselves into position and started. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bibi and Mrs. Martin cheered Tina on. Show him, Tina, come on, go! Alexander, do not disgrace our house, said Count Falco with a slightly sardonic undertone. Another push-up followed, but Alex had a visibly difficult time keeping up. Come on, he's already losing it anyway, Freddie remarked dryly to Tina. Right he was. Alex tried to push up once more, but then fell to the ground. Count Falco seemed indifferent about what he had done to his son. On the contrary, he was happy that he had another chance. Oh, didn't make it. Let's go again. Whose fate does the Count hold now? He had already given the bottle a forceful spin, and this time it stopped in front of Bibi. In high spirits, Count Falco shouted, Bibi, take off your socks and chew on them. But Bibi didn't let herself be provoked and retorted calmly, Then at least I won't have to wash them. She took off her shoes and slipped the socks off her feet. Falco, you didn't even ask her whether truth or dare, Mrs. Martin rebuked him. Slowly but surely, his playing behavior began to get on her nerves. And yet she does it, with great pleasure, Count Falco replied, unperturbed. Bibi chewed on her socks and commented on her actions. Delicious. Everyone laughed, except Mrs. Martin, who continued to admonish Count Falco. You play by your very own rules here. Count Falco looked at her in surprise. Who? I do? Yes, you who? No one else is playing here anymore, Mrs. Martin replied, irritated. Not at all, Suzanne, protested Count Falco. I play by the official rules. Bibi took advantage of the small quarrel, quickly turning the bottle. With a hushed voice and minute gestures, she cast a spell on it. Eeny, meeny, squeaky clean, Bibi's magic sight unseen. Bottle fixed on thoughts concealed, may Chico's thoughts now be revealed. Whiz, whiz. The bottle turned at first to Chico before stopping at Count Falco, who was again overjoyed. But then it twitched back just a little bit, pointing directly at the young Spaniard. Nobody except Tina had noticed Bibi's witchcraft. She smiled conspiratorially. When Bibi asked him, truth or dare, Chico chose dare. Bibi had already expected this and dared him in her own way. Okay then, explain the origin of your noble family in 3 sentences. Chico had always avoided this question, having only ever claimed that he came from Andalusia. Freddie twisted his eyes. Hey, we're playing truth or dare here, not who am I? But his objection was ignored. A very interesting task, Count Falco lit up. Bibi looked at Chico, who stuttered and began to explain. Bueno, yes, the origin of mi familia. He swallowed and seemed to think feverishly before continuing. Okay, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-abuelo. Chico the First. He got his land personally from Columbus, because of his merits in La Mancha and España. Exactly, yes, and since then, we are called de La Mancha. Freddie grumbled. At least 4 sentences. Bibi looked at Chico skeptically. Count Falco, on the other hand, was enthusiastic. That is grandiose. But since when has La Mancha been in Andalusia? The Count inquired. I see. Yes, no, stuttered Chico embarrassedly. We have moved. Count Falco nodded. Ah, moved. Chico now also added hastily, yes, my mother Elena and I. Elena, Count Falco noted. Do you know Elena? Asked Chico. Bibi noticed his sudden tension. What was this about? Why was he asking that? She looked at Tina, who seemed to be just as curious as her friend. By the way, I know Elena too, Freddie shouted and bellowed into the group. Elena, Elena, I'd like to kiss, but really you're one nobody will miss. The summer children laughed. Freddie was really something. Mrs. Martin also smiled. She liked Freddie, even if he could be exhausting at times. She also wanted the game to go on, and she asked Chico to spin the bottle. Chico spun the bottle, and though he seemed a little disappointed not to get an answer to his question, the bottle landed, as if fate would have it, this time on Count Falco. The Count smiled cheerfully. Of course I'll take the truth again and nothing but the truth. Now, dear Chico, please ask me your question. Chico cleared his throat. Count Falco, you are well educated, a true nobleman, un hombre de palabras bonitas, a man of fine words. Count Falco smiled, flattered. Si, si. Chico looked at him curiously. To whom have you ever written a love letter? Surprised, Count Falco replied. Love letter? I beg you. Falco, you wrote me a love letter once, Mrs. Martin reminded him, which the children found quite funny. Youthful recklessness, Falco defended himself, embarrassed. And that was the only love letter you ever wrote? Chico asked. Why wouldn't it have been the only one? Replied the Count. Father, did you not understand the game? You must not lie, Alex threw in, annoyed. Exactly, and that's why I'm now spinning the bottle again, said his father, already grabbing the bottle. Alex shook his head. That you're not ashamed. Then the bottle came to a standstill right in front of him. Count Falco looked at his son. Ha! Perhaps you should be ashamed of yourself, my truth-loving son. For what? Alex asked with a scowl. Count Falco grinned. Who was the first girl you kissed? Well? Chico smiled. That's easy. Alex killed his father with his eyes, which Bibi and Tina witnessed in astonishment. What was going on here? Well, out with the truth, Count Falco asked his son. Or did you not understand the game? Alex wrestled with himself, and then finally he answered. It was Giselda von Solvang. What? Tina stared at him in bewilderment. Count Falco nodded his approval. Giselda von Solvang. Freddie grinned. Wow! A very charming girl, explained Count Falco with a certain satisfaction. He turned to Tina. Tina, now you know I love you very, very much, but, well, that's the way it was. Mrs. Martin looked at the Count with a sorry shake of the head and called out, Short break. Seething, Tina glared at Alex and commanded him, Come with me. Secrets. Mrs. Martin tried to reset the children's attention by bringing out snacks. She and Roger held a rope with lots of little homemade sausages tied to it, which the children had to grab only with their mouths, not with their hands. Freddie couldn't hold on to it, but tore one off with his hand anyway while merrily passing by. Mrs. Martin shouted after him, Without hands, Freddie, hello! Freddie just kept walking, past Count Falco, who cheered him on with his lemonade. But Freddie was much more interested in what was going on between Alex and Tina, who were standing off to the side by the green tractor. Tina, Alex said, I was 9 years old when this nobility meeting took place, and Giselda— What kind of name is that anyway? Tina asked, vexed. In any case, it was completely meaningless, Alex affirmed. Only now he noticed Freddie, who had heard these last words and grinned cheekily as he turned to Tina. Hey, he said, slickly. There's always a Plan F. Plan Freddie. Shut it, Alex snapped at him. But Freddie had already moved on, getting off his chest what he'd wanted to tell Tina for a long time. In any case, he was always available for her. Tina drew Alex's attention again. And what if I also kissed someone before you, at 10? What? Who? Alex asked in surprise. Tina shook her head. I won't say. You wouldn't have told me voluntarily either. It was also a bit of fun to put Alex on guard. Besides, he'd brought this on himself. Meanwhile, Bibi had gone outside. Chico leaned against the fence of the riding arena, lost in thought. Without further ado, Bibi laid into him. I don't believe a word you say. Chico turned to her in surprise. ¿Qué? De la Mancha? You're not nobility at all, said Bibi. And nagging Count Falco? All that about a love letter? Elena? What are you hiding from us, and why? I am noble, contradicted Chico. To Bibi's surprise, he took her hand in his and looked her directly in the eyes. I know you're angry about yesterday, because I made you look so stupid, but all this has nothing to do with you. I hope you'll understand everything soon. Bibi looked at her hands and swallowed, uncertain whether she should be happy or annoyed when Freddie joined them the next moment, grinning playfully. Bibi quickly pulled her hand back. At that moment, Count Falco stepped out of the barn and shouted, Let's go on! The awful player. Everyone except Alex and Tina had returned to their places. Count Falco clapped his hands in high spirits. My son is late, so I'll just carry on. Before anyone could object, he had already spun the bottle, which pointed to little Finn. Count Falco leaned over to him and asked with a downright devilish glint in his eyes, Truth or dare? Take truth, Mrs. Martin quickly recommended to him. She already suspected that Count Falco would think of something very special as a compulsory task. Alex and Tina, who joined in again, also nodded. It would really be better to take truth. But unfortunately, Finn decided otherwise and answered, Dare. Count Falco nodded contently. Very well, then get up now, go into the dark forest, collect a mushroom, and bring it back here. He smiled innocently, as if he had just sent the boy to pick flowers on a sunny day. Finn looked at him anxiously. Alex was horrified. Father, you can't do that. Creepy, Freddie said aloud. Chico shook his head. No, I'm sure it was a joke. Pah! Cried Count Falco. When I was a boy, I walked alone through the forest for hours at night. He turned to Mrs. Martin, who also stared at him, expressionless. You said yourself that wolves have no interest in humans. The word wolves caused even greater panic among the children. Does he really have to do this now? Ellie asked in a frightened voice. Of course, those are the rules, Count Falco replied, looking at Finn with a stern expression. Little man, you go out there now. If not, then you shouldn't have played along in the first place. Mrs. Martin stood up abruptly. That's enough now. Come on, let's go. She pulled Finn towards her and gave Felina and Ellie a sign to leave. She turned with fury to Count Falco. How could I forget that? You were already an awful player in the past. Count Falco replied indignantly. What? I play completely according to the rules. But that didn't stop Mrs. Martin from bringing the children into the house. The two girls moaned that they couldn't stay longer. But I'm allowed to stay awake longer at home, Ellie complained to Roger, who also got up. Felina nodded. Me too. I'm even allowed to watch movies from the age of 36. Roger flashed a broad smile. Film ratings only went to the age of 18, but of course it sounded even more exciting that way. I'm 16 and I'm already going, Freddie interjected appeasingly. Count Falco called after Mrs. Martin. A terrible player! Who is the spoil sport here, Only then did he notice his son and Bibi and Tina, whose eyes rested reproachfully on him. Even Chico seemed to be embarrassed by his behavior. What then? Count Falco snapped, insulted. The earlier you learn, the better. Your grandfather, dear Alexander, always used to send me into the forest. Grandpa was terrible, Alex replied. Count Falco even agreed with him. Yes, but I obeyed. Oh, and you liked that? Tina asked with a touch of sarcasm. Count Falco nodded. Yes, of course. It helped me. I was never afraid, still to this day. Bibi's doubt flowed into anger. Who did Alex's father think he was to spoil their game night? What, you don't believe me? Asked Count Falco. Splendid! Then all bets are on. Bibi nodded. Good. As you like it. She raised her arms and chanted. Eeny meeny judgment night, facing fears with truth or fright. Bibi! Chico tried to stop her, but she continued without pause. Eeny meeny witch's flight, Falco to the darkened sight, whiz whiz. The next moment, Count Falco found himself alone in the deep dark forest. Impertinence! He shouted angrily. If you think you can upset me with this, go ahead. I have no fear. At that moment, the undergrowth rustled and cracked. Was someone following him? Whimpered the Count, frightened to death. Promised. Back in the barn, Chico waited restlessly for the return of Count Falco while Bibi slowly began to form a guilty conscience. Alex didn't care. He was too preoccupied finding out who Tina had kissed and suddenly asked her, Well, was it your funny cousin? What's his name? Tina's jaw dropped open. What? I think you kissed your cousin. Tina rolled her eyes. Oh, Alex. Chico looked at Bibi forcefully. Where was Count Falco? She defended herself. My spells don't usually last long anyways. And besides, the Count said himself that he wasn't afraid. In a flash, the Count again found himself standing beside them. The spell had finally worn off. Ah! His eyes were wide with terror as his head darted from left to right. Surprised, Chico looked at him. Count Falco! Soy yo, Chico. Is everything all right? After relaxing his nervous panting, Alex's father realized where he was and regained composure. Knowing he was now safe, he fell back immediately into his old behavior. Of course everything is all right, but to simply cast me into the forest? He glared at Bibi. There will be consequences, Bibi Blocksberg. That much is certain. With that, he stormed out of the barn. Chico went after him. Count Falco, wait! Count Falco stomped across the moonlit courtyard and flinched when he thought he heard a wolf howling. Then the door behind him creaked and he turned, relieved to find Chico approaching. That was maybe excessive, what Bibi did. He sided with the Count, attempting to placate him. Bibi had lost interest in Alex, who was still on the kissing subject. Well, I'll take another guess. Benjamin from the zoo? She stepped resolutely out into the darkness and listened as Chico explained to the Count. Even if you were a little challenged, I totally understand. I mean, we are so similar in that respect. Oh, yes? Count Falco returned in surprise. Chico nodded. Shouldn't I accompany you home? The Count shook his head. No, that's really not necessary. But when he heard another crackling sound in the bushes behind him, he hastily added, I mean, if you're going the same way anyway, I'd be happy to accompany you for a while. He was really at his wit's end. They walked over to the stable to get the horses. Bibi followed them with nimble, quiet steps. If you have time, you must show me your horses. I heard they are all Andalusians, remarked Chico as they entered the stable. Bibi stood outside and listened intently while the two of them took the horses and continued talking. Indeed, replied Count Falco, world-class Arabian descendants. Chico was amused at how laboriously Count Falco tried to explain the conquest of Spain by the Moors and the subsequent recapture. But he liked that. He actually liked everything about the Count. And do you buy those from a particular ranch? He asked further. No, replied Count Falco, but only from the best. Chico smiled. I mean, it would be pretty crazy if you had ever been on a farm in my area before, around Costa de la Luz. Count Falco took this in with wonder. You bet, but that was ages ago, at least 16 years ago now. Chico smiled. 16 years, huh? Just as old as I am. Suddenly, everything was crystal clear to Bibi. Count Falco, on the other hand, began reminiscing. Yes, a wonderful time. Lost in thought, he led Cleopatra out of the stable. Chico followed with Tricky on the reins, but Bibi swiftly jumped in his way without Count Falco noticing anything. Quietly but firmly, she said, "You are Count Falco's son? That is your secret? Isn't that right? That's why you came to Falkenstein." Chico's silence was answer enough. Bibi looked at him urgently. "You must tell him and Alex as well. The longer you wait, the worse things will get." Chico made a calming gesture. "Bibi, por favor, give me a little time. My father, Count Falco, he hates surprises. Promise not to tell anyone before I do. Please." Bibi looked at him searchingly. He seemed to be serious, and she trusted him. "I promise." Whom did Tina kiss? Bibi's mind was racing when she returned to Tina and Alex in the barn. It was hard to believe. While she had just found out that Alex's world had come unhinged, he was still busy speculating who Tina had kissed when she was 10. The two had already made themselves comfortable in their sleeping bags, as everyone wanted to spend the night in the hay bales. "Okay, let's narrow this down. Was it on Martin's farm?" Alex wanted to know. "No," Tina replied briefly. "But in Falkenstein?" Alex asked. Tina nodded. "And he comes from Falkenstein too?" Alex dug even deeper. "Don't mess with me. Who's that supposed to be? I mean, you haven't been making out with Freddie, have you?" Bibi threw herself down into the straw next to them. "Oh man, as if a few kisses from years ago could change your relationship." "Bibi, where have you been all this time?" Tina asked in surprise. Bibi replied with a hesitant look at Alex. "I looked after your father. All is well. Chico is taking him to the castle now." This irritated Alex, as if his father could not ride to the castle alone. And what was Chico doing there? "Yes, well, it was Freddie," Tina suddenly admitted. "Excuse me?" Alex and Bibi let out simultaneously, both quite taken by surprise. Tina shrugged her shoulders. "He repaired my bike and then I gave him a kiss." Alex stuttered. "And how was it?" Tina smiled. "Good." When Alex stared at her in disgust, she pointed to her cheek. "Man, on the cheek. Now calm down." "And Freddie has had a crush on you ever since," laughed Bibi. Tina grimaced. "Ha ha ha!" Alex looked up at the ceiling. Tina snuggled up against him and whispered, "You're sweet when you're jealous." Now Alex had to smile. "You too." Bibi let out a sigh of relief. There you go. Suddenly, the stable door burst open and Freddie came rushing in with a backpack. "I went and got my sleeping bag. Naturally, I have to stay a little longer when it's so cozy in here." Tina shot him a bewildered look. "Freddie!" Then exchanged a knowing glance with her friends. Oh, great. Welcome to Falkenstein Castle. After their ride through the darkness, the Count and Chico reached Falkenstein Castle. Count Falco laboriously tampered with the number code of the large entrance door, but the lock could not be opened, no matter which combination of numbers he entered. Yes, just turning the numbers around?" Chico nodded politely. "I see." Count Falco tried another combination, again unsuccessfully. For him, it was clear. "My butler, Ethelbert, must have changed the number. Ethelbert? Ethelbert?" he shouted. He turned to Chico. "We've already once been broken into, but now with this latest security technology, nobody can get in." Chico smiled. "Yes, I see that." Count Falco cleared his throat. "I hardly expect you to ride back alone in the middle of the night. Ethelbert will prepare the guest room for you." At that moment, the door opened. Ethelbert, in a long nightgown and a peculiar stocking cap on his head, stood in front of them and remarked with relief, "Finally! I was quite worried." Count Falco nodded kindly at Chico and pointed to the door. "Welcome to Falkenstein Castle." With a smile still wide across his face, Chico entered the magnificent castle. Back at the barn, Tina was lying between Freddie and Alex. Both were snoring. She tossed restlessly back and forth until she suddenly opened her eyes and straightened up. "I'm going mad," she said aloud. She first pinched her finger and thumb over Alex's nose, then Freddie's. Nothing helped. Barely a minute had passed before the two continued snoring. Only then did she notice that Bibi wasn't sleeping at all. Instead, her friend was staring thoughtfully at the high barn ceiling. "Bibi, everything okay?" Bibi nodded without looking at her. "Yes." Tina frowned. "What's the matter?" Bibi shrugged helplessly. "I'm afraid I can't tell you." "But we always tell each other everything." Bibi sighed. Should she tell her best friend what was going on? She thought of Chico, to whom she had made a promise, and who had promised her something. Now he was off at the castle. Undecided, Bibi looked back at Tina and wished her good night. Chico was also still awake. The young Spaniard snuck out of the guest room and into the library, where he replaced the Chronicle, which he had hurriedly jammed into his backpack at Martin's farm, back on the shelf. Then he looked around smiling. Welcome to Falkenstein Castle. Here, he felt at home.